You know, Jim, the waffle iron was invented for people who have wrinkled waffles.
In the 1970s, American television audiences grew familiar with the image of two blonde men standing side by side, holding guitars and always smiling. Jim and Jon Hager, commonly known as the Hager Twins, brought a sense of warmth, humor, and approachability every time they appeared on Hee Haw. They looked as if they had never experienced a bad day. But few people knew that behind those cheerful performances was a personal life that was far from easy. In 2008, Jim died of a heart attack, and just 8 months later, Jon passed away as well. America lost two familiar smiles, leaving behind a story that is both beautiful and sorrowful, one that reflects the deep bond of brotherhood and the hidden cost of fame, the foundation of a lifelong bond. Jim and Jon Hager were born on August 30th, 1941, in Chicago, Illinois. At a time when the United States was entering World War II, they were identical twins, yet very little information was ever made public about their biological parents. From the beginning, their story carried a quiet absence, an unknown origin that neither brother spoke about often later in life. They were soon adopted by a Methodist minister and his wife, who raised them in Park Ridge, a calm suburb outside Chicago. Their home was structured around faith and discipline, but it was also stable and supportive. The twins grew up with clear rules, regular church attendance, and a strong sense of family order. From an early age, Jim and Jon were rarely apart. They dressed alike, attended the same classes, and often confused their teachers. Friends later recalled that seeing one usually meant the other was close by. Each brother seemed to function with greater confidence when the other was present. Music entered their lives when they were about 11 years old. They began singing in the church choir, performed at school events, and spent long evenings practicing guitar together. The duo admired the harmony style of the Everly Brothers and worked to replicate that same vocal blend. Practicing side by side strengthened not only their musical ability, but also their emotional connection. Over time, that closeness grew into deep emotional dependence. For most of their lives, the brothers were almost never separated, except for roughly 3.5 years when Jon moved to Nashville to pursue music opportunities. Friends described this period as unusual precisely because it was so rare. Their religious upbringing appeared to shape their personalities differently. Jim was often described as quiet and sensitive, while Jon was more outgoing and socially comfortable. These contrasting traits complemented their stage presence, yet offstage they sometimes left Jim more vulnerable to stress. Some observers believe that the lack of connection to their biological family pushed the twins even closer together. They were not just siblings, they were each other's primary source of security. A 2024 article from Open to Hope notes that twins with intense emotional bonds often face severe psychological shock when one dies. Looking back at the lives of Jim and Jon Hager, this insight feels less like theory and more like an early signal that the very bond which helped define their success might one day become their greatest emotional risk. From humble beginnings to Hee Haw stardom. Like many young performers of their era, Jim and Jon Hager moved to California with a clear goal: build a career in entertainment. The transition was not glamorous. They studied performing arts, took small jobs, and accepted minor stage roles wherever they could find them. Some nights they played in small Los Angeles clubs for modest pay. Competition was intense, and steady income was never guaranteed. Their breakthrough came in 1969 through a chance connection. Country music star Buck Owens noticed the twins and saw immediate value in their tight harmonies and natural timing. He hired them as guitarists and backup vocalists for his touring show. The job provided something they had been missing: financial stability and industry exposure. More importantly, it placed them in front of the right audiences. Not long after, the brothers joined Hee Haw, a country-themed comedy and music television program that aired nationally and competed with popular variety shows like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. The format blended jokes, sketches, and live music, and it suited the twins perfectly. Their humor felt relaxed rather than rehearsed, and their singing carried an easy sincerity that viewers trusted. Audiences responded quickly. The Hager Twins became recognizable faces across the country. Fan mail arrived in large volumes, and their appearances drew consistent applause. For many viewers, they represented reliability, performers who showed up smiling week after week. Their association with the show lasted for decades, helping sustain a career that spanned roughly 25 years in the public eye. Yet early success carried its own pressure. Television demanded consistency. Producers preferred the twins exactly as audiences expected them: cheerful, wholesome, and predictable. Creative risks were discouraged, including performing too much original material that might shift their established image. Remaining on-brand became part of the job. Maintaining that persona required energy. The expectation to always appear upbeat left little room for personal struggle. Over time, the effort to protect a flawless public identity began to create quiet strain. Rapid fame can blur individual differences, and in the case of Jim and Jon, it often did. Their contrasting personalities, one more reserved, the other more socially driven, were less visible behind synchronized performances. On stage, they moved as a unit. Off stage, those differences did not disappear. They simply went unnoticed. In hindsight, this period established both their greatest strength and a subtle vulnerability. Fame elevated them, but it also encouraged the idea that they functioned best as one inseparable act, a belief that would shape the emotional challenges they faced later in life. Career peak and the pressure behind the spotlight. At their peak, Jim and Jon Hager were no longer just performers. They were part of the identity of Hee Haw. Week after week, audiences saw them standing in the show's famous cornfield sets, delivering short punchlines, trading jokes with cast members, or shifting seamlessly into harmony-driven ballads. Their timing felt effortless. Their smiles looked natural. Viewers trusted what they saw. The reaction was strong and consistent. Women often described the twins as charming and approachable, rather than distant celebrities. Children copied their jokes. Families recognized them instantly in public places. Fame, for a time, appeared stable. But television success runs on routine, and routine can become exhausting. Production schedules were long. Episodes required repeated takes, quick costume changes, and constant energy under studio lights. The structure of the show rarely changed. Laugh, deliver the line, sing, reset, repeat. Predictability helped ratings, yet it limited artistic freedom. Over time, creative tension surfaced. The twins occasionally wanted to explore new material, including more original music, but producers favored the proven formula. From a business perspective, consistency meant lower risk. From an artist's perspective, it could feel restrictive. By the mid-1980s, these differences contributed to their gradual departure from the program that had defined them. Behind the scenes, the brothers were not identical in temperament. Jon generally thrived in social environments. He enjoyed conversation, industry gatherings, and the energy that came with visibility. Jim moved in the opposite direction. Friends often described him as more sensitive and inward-looking, while Jon could recharge around people. Jim appeared to need distance. There were quiet signs of strain. Some acquaintances believed Jim struggled with depression, though it was never publicly confirmed. Others suspected a reliance on prescription medication during particularly stressful periods. Nothing was openly discussed. Protecting their shared image remained a priority. Rumors occasionally circulated about an internal struggle, not a public feud, but a private weight carried largely out of view. Maintaining a cheerful persona required discipline. and neither brother wanted to damage the career they had built together. The gap between their onstage presence and private reality slowly widened. In the documentary Dead Months Apart, the life and sad ending of the Hager Twins, one acquaintance recalled that Jim seemed most alive when the camera was on. The comment was simple but revealing. Performance provided structure, applause provided reassurance, and the stage offered clarity. Away from it, the emotional landscape looked less certain. This pattern reflects a familiar paradox within the entertainment industry. Fame creates access, opportunity, and financial reward, but it can also intensify emotional pressure. Performers are expected to remain recognizable versions of themselves, even as their inner lives evolve. For someone naturally sensitive, that expectation can be heavy. Looking back, the twins' most successful years also planted the seeds of later difficulty. Their popularity depended on unity, reliability, and emotional control. Those qualities helped them endure in a competitive field. Yet they also encouraged silence around personal struggle. From the outside, everything still worked. The audience laughed. The music continued. The image held inside that success. However, the cost of staying unchanged was slowly accumulating, a reminder that the brightest periods of a career sometimes conceal the earliest signs of fatigue. Personal lives, love, loss, and quiet loneliness. To the public, Jim and Jon Hager looked like television's ideal bachelors, handsome, friendly, and always ready with a joke. Their image suggested simplicity, two successful entertainers enjoying the rewards of fame. Yet their private lives were far more complicated than their on-screen personas implied. Jon was generally the more socially active of the two. He dated often and was occasionally linked, through industry rumors, to women connected to the country music scene, including performers associated with Hee Haw. Still, he rarely allowed relationships to deepen into long-term commitments. Friends observed that Jon valued independence and seemed careful about emotional attachment. Career stability and his partnership with Jim remained his primary focus. Jim approached relationships differently. He dated less frequently but invested more emotionally when he did. During the 1980s, he reportedly formed a serious relationship with a woman in Tennessee. Those close to him noticed a visible shift. He appeared calmer and spoke about the possibility of a quieter life away from constant travel. For perhaps the first time, the idea of building a home separate from the stage felt realistic. The relationship ended abruptly when the woman died unexpectedly, reportedly due to sudden illness or an accident. Jim rarely spoke publicly about the loss, but acquaintances later described a clear change in him afterward. He became more guarded, less open, and noticeably reluctant to pursue new relationships. Some believed he had chosen, consciously or not, to close that chapter of his life. For both brothers, maintaining romance proved difficult. Entertainment schedules required frequent travel, irregular hours, and long stretches away from home. Privacy was limited, and public recognition made ordinary dating complicated. Over time, relationships often gave way to professional obligations. As the years passed, Jim and Jon increasingly relied on each other as their most constant source of support. That reliance provided stability, but it also narrowed their emotional worlds. Without spouses or children, their daily lives remained closely intertwined. A friend quoted in the Los Angeles Times once summarized their dynamic plainly. They were always half of each other, with little room for anyone else. The remark was not critical. It reflected admiration for their loyalty. Yet it also hinted at a quiet cost. Emotional loss can deepen existing vulnerability, and for someone already inclined toward sensitivity, grief may linger beneath the surface. Observers later suggested that Jim's heartbreak contributed to periods of withdrawal. Meanwhile, Jon's protective presence may have functioned as both comfort and shield. Their bond worked like armor against the unpredictability of the outside world. At the same time, armor can limit movement. The stronger their dependence became, the harder it was to imagine separate futures. This pattern is not unusual among lifelong performing partners. Shared careers often reinforce shared identities, making individual reinvention more difficult. For the Hager twins, the partnership that fueled their success may also have reduced the space needed to build independent personal lives. From a distance, they appeared fortunate, recognized, respected, and rarely alone. Yet loneliness does not always come from physical isolation. Sometimes it grows quietly within tightly connected lives. By middle age, the twins had achieved professional longevity, but remained personally unanchored. Love had entered their lives, but it had not stayed. What remained constant was each other, a source of strength that, over time, also became a fragile emotional balance. Decline after fame, from spotlight to obscurity. When Hee Haw ended its original run in 1993, it marked more than the close of a television program. It signaled the end of a structured life the Hager twins had followed for decades. The weekly visibility disappeared almost overnight. Fan mail slowed. Invitations became less frequent. The brothers continued performing, but the scale had changed. Instead of national television audiences, they appeared at state fairs, small festivals, and nostalgia-driven events where longtime viewers gathered. They also recorded gospel music, leaning into the religious roots that had shaped their childhood. The work provided purpose, yet it lacked the reach and momentum they once knew. A quieter challenge soon emerged: identity. For most of their adult lives, Jim and Jon had been recognized instantly. Without that recognition, a difficult question lingered. Who were they without the audience? Aging made the transition more visible. Their hair turned gray, their pace slowed, and the energy required for constant travel grew harder to sustain. Jon tried to adapt. He explored acting opportunities and focused more seriously on songwriting. Several projects, however, failed to gain traction. Rejection is common in entertainment, but after years of success, it can feel unfamiliar and deeply personal. Jim moved in the opposite direction. Friends noticed he became harder to reach and less responsive to phone calls. Public appearances seemed to drain rather than energize him. Periods of isolation grew longer. The shift from national celebrities to what the industry often labels legacy or nostalgia performers can be emotionally complex. Recognition still exists, but it is rooted in the past rather than the present. Applause celebrates memory more than momentum. For the twins, this transition carried a quiet weight. Their careers had always been shared, which meant uncertainty was shared as well. Reinventing oneself is difficult. Reinventing a duo can be even harder. Both brothers searched for grounding in different ways. Jim reportedly attended spiritual retreats, perhaps looking for calm outside the pressures of performance. Jon devoted time to charitable efforts and community involvement. These pursuits suggested an effort to redefine meaning beyond fame. Yet neither fully replaced the structure their earlier career had provided. The emotional risk of fading public attention is not unique to the Hager twins. Many performers struggle when the spotlight shifts elsewhere. Work had once offered rhythm, validation, and direction. Without it, days can feel less defined. Dependence on a joint identity may have intensified this challenge. Their success had always been built on togetherness, matching voices, shared timing, a unified image. When the industry evolved and demand changed, that same unity limited the paths available to them individually. From the outside, their later years appeared calm. There were still performances, still loyal fans, still moments of recognition. Yet beneath that surface was a quieter adjustment, learning how to live without the constant affirmation that had once framed their lives. The decline was not sudden or dramatic. It unfolded gradually, almost politely, and like many slow transitions, its emotional impact was easy for the public to overlook, even as it reshaped the final chapter of their story. A tragic ending. Death just 8 months apart. On May 1st, 2008, Jim Hager died of a heart attack in Nashville at the age of 66. The news traveled quickly among longtime fans, but received relatively modest national attention, a quiet contrast to the visibility he had once known. Official reports listed cardiac arrest as the cause. Yet those who knew him sensed that the roots of his decline ran deeper. Years of emotional strain, periods of isolation, and the gradual loss of public identity had likely taken a cumulative toll. For Jon, the loss was immediate and destabilizing. The brothers had spent nearly their entire lives side by side. Suddenly, the constant presence that had anchored Jon's daily routine was gone. Friends observed a sharp change. He withdrew from professional opportunities and showed little interest in returning to regular performances. Much of his time appeared focused on remembrance rather than rebuilding. Some acquaintances noted that Jon left many of Jim's belongings untouched, as if preserving them helped maintain a connection. The gesture was quiet but revealing, less about nostalgia and more about difficulty accepting a new reality. On January 9th, 2009, just 8 months after Jim's death, Jon Hager died in his sleep at age 67. No dramatic illness had defined his final months. Instead, those close to him described a man whose emotional center had been deeply shaken. Friends spoke carefully, but consistently. It felt as though part of Jon had disappeared with his brother. Psychological research often highlights the intensity of twin bonds, particularly among identical twins who share lifelong routines and identities. An article from Open to Hope points to a phenomenon sometimes called broken heart syndrome, in which severe grief can trigger physical decline. While such connections are complex and rarely explained by a single factor, the timing of Jon's death inevitably led many to reflect on that possibility. Their story reached its most poignant point, not on stage, but in absence. The partnership that had defined their success also defined their vulnerability. Separation, when it finally came, was absolute. In the end, their lives seemed to mirror the harmony they once created in song, closely aligned, difficult to separate, and ultimately concluding within the same quiet span of time. Legacy and lessons from a quiet tragedy. For many viewers, the legacy of Jim and Jon Hager is still tied to laughter, harmony, and reliability. On Hee Haw, they represented a form of entertainment that felt uncomplicated. Music, humor, and familiarity delivered week after week. Even decades later, clips of their performances continue to remind audiences of a period when their presence seemed constant. Yet their story also serves as a quiet warning about the less visible side of fame. Success in entertainment often requires emotional discipline. Performers are expected to remain upbeat, recognizable, and professionally dependable regardless of personal struggle. Over time, that expectation can blur the boundary between public identity and private reality. When the spotlight fades, the adjustment can be disorienting. The Hager twins illustrate how psychological pressure does not always appear dramatic from the outside. Careers can look stable, while inner resilience gradually erodes. Their later years suggest the importance of emotional support systems, friendships, family connections, or professional care, especially for individuals whose lives have long revolved around public validation. Their bond as identical twins was both a strength and a vulnerability. Lifelong emotional dependence can create extraordinary partnership, but it may also narrow the space needed for independent coping. When one brother died, the structure that had guided the other for decades suddenly disappeared. Their experience invites comparison to other harmony-driven acts, such as the Everly Brothers. whose careers also demonstrated the intensity that close musical partnerships can generate. Sanamairi, strong creative bonds often produce memorable art, yet they can carry personal strain that audiences rarely see. Today, conversations about mental health in the entertainment industry are more open than they were during the twins' peak years. Their story contributes to that awareness by underscoring a simple truth. Recognition and applause do not protect anyone from loneliness, grief, or depression. Remembering Jim and Jon Hager means holding both images at once: the smiling performers audiences loved, and the human beings who navigated pressures largely out of view. Their lives encourage a broader understanding of success, one that values emotional well-being as much as professional achievement. Conclusion: remembering an unbreakable pair. The story of Jim and Jon Hager traces a quiet arc, from shared laughter on national television to the stillness that followed their final years. For decades, they stood side by side, creating music, delivering jokes, and offering audiences a sense of comfort. Their partnership looked effortless, yet beneath it were pressures that gradually reshaped their lives. Their tragedy was not defined by a single moment, but by accumulation: fading fame, personal loss, emotional dependence, and the difficulty of redefining identity after years in the spotlight. When Jim died in 2008, and Jon followed just 8 months later, the closeness that had once been their greatest strength revealed its most fragile edge. Their bond appeared inseparable, even in death. Remembering the Hager twins means seeing more than performers who once filled television screens. It means recognizing two individuals who navigated the demands of visibility while carrying private burdens few could fully see. Their lives reflect a broader truth about fame: that admiration does not shield a person from loneliness, and success does not guarantee emotional security. In the end, they remain symbols of both devotion and vulnerability. Their story invites a simple reflection: beyond applause and recognition, the deepest measures of a life are often connection, balance, and emotional care.